Okay, so we should be live in 3, 2, 1.
Hi, and welcome to today's conversation on the American Rescue Plan. I'm Jenny Romich of the University of Washington School of Social Work and of the West Coast Poverty Center, headquartered at the School of Social Work. And I'm glad to see so many of you who've joined us for this event on our live stream today. Our audience includes members of the School of Social Work, the wider UW community, as well as community practitioners and partners with connections to the West Coast Poverty Center. So I invite you to introduce yourselves in the chat. As relevant, tell us what organization or affiliation you're representing. We may have some current social work practicum students. I'd love to see where your practicum sites are. And speaking of the chat function, we are streaming today's event on YouTube live stream. We invite you to ask questions or make comments at any point throughout the event. We'll monitor those. And per our title today, we have planned some time to be in conversation with each other and you. So before I introduce the brilliant folks around me, I'd like to welcome my esteemed colleague and leader, Dr. Eddie Uehara, the professor and Balmore Endowed Dean in Social Work from the UW School of Social Work, to say a few words of acknowledgement and welcome here. Eddie?
Thank you, Jenny, and good afternoon and welcome, everyone. We're so pleased that you're joining us for this very important and timely conversation. But before we get started, I want to acknowledge that at the University of Washington, we learn, teach, and live on or near the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish people, and that the UW Seattle campus, where the school and the West Coast Poverty Center are located, is situated on the traditional territory of the Duwamish people. We all have a responsibility to acknowledge our debt to the Coast Salish people, past, present, and future, to recognize the histories of Indigenous land dispossession, and to discern the implications of this history for our own personal and professional obligations and actions. Thank you. Well, our topic this afternoon is the American Rescue Plan, an ambitious and complex piece of legislation that some have described as the most important anti-poverty legislation in a generation. In generations, actually. I know we've all had questions about its implications, not only for pandemic recovery, but also for the dramatic social and material inequities that the pandemic has laid bare. We are deeply fortunate today to co-host this session with UW's West Coast Poverty Center. The center is a hub of excellence in research, education, and policy analysis that serves as a critical resource for understanding the causes and consequences of poverty. I know we've all had questions about its implications, not only for pandemic recovery, but also for, I'm hearing some echo, I'm sorry about that, for understanding the causes and consequences of poverty and effective approaches for reducing it. The School of Social Work is proud to house the center, and we are proud to support the many faculty, staff, and students who contribute to the center's vital work. Professor Jenny Romich, the center's very distinguished director, will lead today's panel. Jenny studies low-income households and their interactions with public policy. Her ongoing research includes the study of the effects of Seattle's $15 minimum wage. Jenny is a brilliant and rigorous scholar with a wealth of insight into this current moment and what steps are needed to build a more equitable society. I thank her for guiding our conversation, and I thank our panelists, esteemed Associate Professor Amelia Gavin, and our distinguished alumni, Omar Cuevas Vega and Rachel Myers, whom Jenny will introduce. I look forward to learning more from all of you and to advancing this most important discussion. Thank you so much.
All right, for those of you playing Zoom bingo at home, I think that was the first somebody talking while muted of the session today. Thank you, Eddie. And I echo your thanks to Omar, Rachel, and Amelia for joining us today. I'll introduce each one of them in turn. But before we begin, I wanted to add a little bit more context about why the School of Social Work and the Poverty Center are hosting this conversation. As Eddie indicated, the American Rescue Plan is perhaps one of the most important anti-poverty measures in decades. It's also a major change to our social welfare state. And social work as a field, one of our branches deals with the design and administration of social welfare policy, of organized public action that shapes and affects human well-being. Our profession had its roots over 100 years ago in the progressive era, and many of our social work ancestors and allies were involved in fighting for relief from the vagaries of capitalism during the Great Depression. And this historic event gave rise to what's really the foundation of America's welfare state, the Social Security Act, the Fair Labor Standards Act, and some other legislation of the 1930s. Scholars of history remind us that times of great turmoil can be times of great change. So in thinking about the importance of the American Rescue Plan today, we both want to spend some time to digest the particulars, because there are some particulars of the act that really have implications for social work practice. But we also want to think about the broader meaning of this work. And so that's why, as a social work scholar, I was interested in bringing folks together. As for the involvement of the West Coast Poverty Center, that was a very natural fit, because the provisions in the Rescue Act contain big anti-poverty provisions, including one that scholars like me have been advocating for decades. So, and together, both the school and the center have a commitment to bridging scholarship, education, policy, and practice. And so we hope to bring these threads together. So we are indeed talking about the American Rescue Act, Rescue Plan. It was passed by Congress and signed into law by President Biden just over a month ago. It's a $1.9 trillion plan with some provisions that will extend over the next few months, such as the expanded unemployment insurance benefits, and some that will stretch up to 5 years in the future. And as I indicated, many of the elements in the bill have already received a lot of public attention. The stimulus payments, the social media renamed Stimmies, have gone out to many, but not all, eligible households. They've received a lot of attention, but some of the provisions in the Act are going to be affecting and administered by and part of the systems that social workers work in today. So today I have 2 alums and 1 faculty colleague to talk about 3 of the particulars in the Act. I would have loved to have had 15 alums and 5 or 10 colleagues to talk about all the elements of the Act, but we wanted to keep this to a reasonable discussion, and particularly glad we did that given today's competition with the weather in Seattle. So it's great to see the folks who are coming in on the live stream, and thank you for joining us as you are. I am pleased to introduce our first guest panelist today. Omar Cuevas Vega is a 2017 graduate of the School of Social Work. He now serves at Poverty Action, Statewide Poverty Action Network, as their policy and field coordinator. Poverty Action is a nonprofit advocacy organization that builds grassroots power to end causes of poverty and to create opportunities for everyone to prosper. As the policy and field coordinator, Omar develops and implements legislative policy priorities. He organizes their network of coalition. He connects members to legislative officials, and he educates their constituents about poverty issues. He describes his poverty, his commitment to ending poverty as stemming from his own kind of personal nature and experience. Omar describes himself as undocumented, unapologetic, and unafraid. And he certainly was quite willing to say yes when I invited him to be with us today. So Omar, thank you so much for being with us, and tell us what's important to understand about the anti-poverty provisions of the rescue plan.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me today. I was really surprised and happy to accept to be on this wonderful panel with my wonderful panelists. So primarily, I will be focusing on two parts of the American Rescue Plan, and that is the child tax credit and the earned income tax credit. As both you and Dean Eddie have mentioned, this has been something that anti-poverty advocates have been asking for many years, decades really. And so it feels like things are getting crossed off our wish list. But one of the pieces that I do want to highlight about what's included in the American Rescue Plan is that it's really a shift in thinking about how we think about welfare in this country. You know, for many decades, it has been a very much a bootstrap mentality of rugged individualism, and you know now there's been a shift in thinking about you know families do need a baseline of support, and that's the way that I see both of these working, is that it does provide a baseline of support for families to be able to have what they need to be able to provide for their families. um, so, you know, I just want to share that. And because they are tax credits, I do want to say that they are exempt from public benefits and possibly garnishments, which makes us really happy, so that it doesn't affect if people are receiving temporary assistance for needy families or SNAP or anything like that. So first, I'll dive into the child tax credit, and I do want to contextualize it for Washingtonians, in that it is estimated that 1.4 million children under the age of 18 would benefit from the expansion, and that is children living in the state of Washington. And that includes 66,000 being lifted above the poverty line, with an additional 159,000 being lifted above or closer to the poverty line by this expansion. So that's always great to hear. You know, primarily this is impacting Black and Latinx families in our state. Um, so prior to the passage of the American Rescue Plan, you know, current millions of children didn't receive the full benefit because many of their families either had too little income or no income at all to qualify. So this would ensure that families with little or no income would qualify and receive the maximum benefit. So I would say that the theme for both of these credits is expansion and boosting. So it's being expanded, but then also the income amount, sort of the benefit amount is being increased as well. So one of the really cool things about the child tax credit is that, well, first of all, it will begin on July 1st of this year, and then families would receive monthly installments from July through December, and then with an additional boost in 2022 during when people do their tax returns. And part of the reason why I highlight this is amazing because normally, you know, families file their taxes and they get their refund and they get this lump sum at some point in the year whenever they file their taxes. And, you know, between spending the refund on bills, on rent, on food, on expenses, and then the money is gone and they're sort of scraping and living month to month on a paycheck. With this monthly installment, it allows a little bit of respite where every month now they're getting a little income boost, and you know that does go a long way. For us at Poverty Action, I would say that that is something that we frequently hear about families, is that there just isn't enough to make ends meet, and so it's just about getting cash into the pockets of folks so that they could be able to use that on what they need. So that's definitely great. And then as far as the earned income tax credit, I think some of the key pieces to highlight about this particular bill is that, as I mentioned, you know, it does expand and boost who qualifies for this earned income tax credit, but really it actually includes working adults who are not raising children at home, as well as childless workers who are still part of a family unit. It does raise the maximum benefit that people can receive, as well as raising the income cap what is required in order to receive this benefit. But I think one of the other best parts about the earned income tax credit is that it actually expands the age range of those who can qualify. So it goes as low as age 19 all the way up to 65 and over. So this is great because it catches a wider net of folks. I think it was estimated to be about 22 million additional working adults would benefit from the earned income tax credit.
Great. Thank you, Omar. And thank you for the emphasis really there on the substantial expansions here. Again, I want to underscore the expansion of the child tax credit, the delivering it every month, and then the expansion of the EITC for workers without dependent kids on their tax returns. These are things that anti-poverty activists such as you and scholars such as me have been advocating for a long time. So cool. I'm glad to have you with us for our discussion today. All right. Next, we have another social worker and SSW alum working for social and economic justice on the macro setting here. Rachel Myers has spent the last 15 years as the executive director of the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance. That is, she's at the helm of the Alliance's work to ensure that all Washington residents have the opportunity to thrive in safe, healthy, affordable homes. Their alliance organizes over 100 housing providers from the nonprofit, private, and public sector. They educate their members, the public, and lawmakers about the need for affordable housing, and they serve as the primary advocate for housing in the state legislature. So I'm particularly grateful that Rachel is with us today, and Omar as well, given that we're still in the midst of the legislative session. So Rachel, thank you for joining us this afternoon. Tell us what's important to understand about the housing provisions of the American Rescue Plan.
Great. Well, thank you again for having me. And I'm really glad to be here. You're right. We're a little over a week away from the end of the legislative session. So I will take a few minutes at some point to make some plugs for advocacy that's still needed, because there's a lot of really, really exciting things happening at our state legislature around housing and homelessness. So yeah, this is an exciting moment. And I just kind of want to reflect for a second that, you know, the last year has been what it's been. It's been really hard. The last 4 years have been really hard in a different way. When you combine that with the pandemic, you know, we have all been just in like this state of fighting off terrible things and trying to keep people safe and trying to prevent disasters from happening for what feels like a really, really long time. So this moment when there's, you know, not only good things that are already happening, but there's sort of this opening. We kind of have this window right now to not just like prevent the worst things from happening and the devastation of the result of the impact of the pandemic from being devastating to communities, but we really have an opportunity to make really meaningful change in, like you said, Jenny, like how we think of our social safety net, how we think of housing. You know, we often, housing advocates talk about housing as a human right. That's an aspirational phrase because it's absolutely not treated as a human right. If it were, we wouldn't have 23,000 people living, you know, without a permanent home in our state. And we're at this moment where that could change. The one thing that I'll say that I'll just kind of make the point, and I know people probably know this, it can change. We have this possibility. It won't change unless we all demand it, unless advocates and activists and regular people who just think of themselves as neighbors who care about their struggling family member or their struggling neighbor, you know, unless we all like really take an opportunity for this moment to fight for change, we won't realize the possibility that's in front of us. So I'll just leave that there for you all to sort of think about for the long term. And yeah, the American Rescue Plan Act has a ton of provisions for housing and for homelessness. And I will say that for the last year, since, you know, COVID first came into our world, housing advocates and homelessness advocates from all across the country have been working together, calling on Congress to fund rental assistance to fund homelessness services and efforts to end homelessness at the scale needed to keep people healthy. It became clearer than ever that to stay healthy, we needed people to have homes. In the homelessness world, people needed to move from crowded congregate shelters into safer alternatives where they had their own bathroom and their own space, and they weren't in a big crowded room with a lot of other people. We also needed to keep people in their homes, even if they had lost their income and couldn't afford to pay the rent. In Washington, just for some context, we are really fortunate that we have a governor who took the crisis seriously and issued an eviction moratorium very quickly and then extended it multiple times. Currently, that's set to expire at the end of June. Nationally, there's also a moratorium on evictions, but it's much more limited. And there's actually research that shows that in places where moratoriums on evictions were lifted during last summer and into the fall, many more people got sick and many more people died from COVID, because when people lost their homes, they doubled up with friends and family. They lived in cars and had to use public spaces to wash their hands and wash their bodies and get food. So it caused people to come into contact with other people at a time when we shouldn't have been doing that. So our eviction moratorium undoubtedly saved lives and prevented people from getting sick, and kept COVID from spreading faster, because fewer people getting sick means fewer people getting sick. So that's a really great thing for us. This is the American Rescue Plan Act is, you probably know, the third of the major relief bills that Congress passed. The first was the CARES Act. There was another bill that doesn't have quite as memorable a name, another relief package passed in December. And so thanks to those, our state has already distributed or is in the process of distributing over $500 million for rental assistance. Some of that was dedicated federal money, some of it was state money that our state on its own, our governor, dedicated to rental assistance. So in addition to the eviction moratorium, even before the Rescue Plan Act, we've done a lot here to keep people housed and keep people's rents being paid. Specific provisions in this new relief package, this $1.9 trillion package, there's another $50 billion for housing and homelessness resources. I'll just briefly summarize it, and then I can share a link for a pretty good fact sheet from the National Low Income Housing Coalition. That gives us another $27.5 billion for rental assistance. So combined with the December bill, that's over $50 billion, which is just about what experts estimate as the need for paying back rent that people haven't been able to pay since the pandemic and through the rest of the pandemic. $5 billion for housing vouchers, and those would actually last through those would be available to families, and the funding lasts through 2030. When families stop, needing a voucher, if they kind of roll off the program after 2023, those vouchers aren't reissued. But for any family who qualifies for a voucher and gets one of those vouchers, they can use that at this point through 2030. It's got another $5 billion for homelessness assistance, another $10 billion to help homeowners who are facing foreclosure, $120 million for housing counseling and fair housing protections, and then another $5 billion for utility assistance. So I think I'll stop with that. It's incredible, and there's a lot more that we can do because this is one time. But like I said, we're in this moment now. So there's some big opportunities coming up ahead of us that I hope we'll have a chance to talk about.
Okay. Thank you so much, Rachel. And our third panelist today is my colleague, Associate Professor Amelia Gavin. Amelia joined the School of Social Work in 2004. As a scholar, she examines disparities in health outcomes, particularly among racial and ethnic groups, with a particular focus around maternal and infant health and birth outcomes. As a professor, she is known for her rigorous approach to the classroom, and we have a generation of admin and policy practice students out there who know how to write memos thanks to Amelia's wielded pen. So Dr. Gavin holds a PhD in social work and political science from the University of Michigan at Ann Arbor, where she also got a master's in public policy and an MSW. So Amelia, you are a true expert. What can you tell us about some of the Medicaid expansion and other health aspects of the rescue plan.
Thanks, Jenny, and thanks, everyone. So somewhere in the hundreds of pages of the American Rescue Plan is a short section that makes a major change to Medicaid coverage for low-income pregnant and postpartum people. The policy change is designed to address a longstanding gap in pregnant and postpartum people who have their health care covered by Medicaid. So before we start talking about the American Rescue Plan, let's talk a little bit about Medicaid, because that has a lot to do with this policy. Medicaid is the single largest payer of prenatal and postnatal care, covering more than 40,000 infants born each year in the United States. Surprisingly and unfortunately, Medicaid covers nearly 50% of infants born each year in Washington state. The eligibility requirements and benefits pregnant people receive through Medicaid vary by state, which makes it very complicated to understand. In Washington state, for instance, pregnant people who do not have health insurance may be eligible for Apple Health, which pays for pregnancy, delivery, and up to 60 days postpartum care. So what does the new policy actually do? Well, the American Rescue Plan allows states the new option to extend the postpartum coverage period under Medicaid from 60 days to a full year. Under the new law, this change in postpartum coverage can also be lengthened under the CHIP program, and states have the option to adopt a new option, but they must provide full Medicaid benefits in order to do that. And the new option takes effect on April 1st, 2022, and will be available for 5 years. The Congressional Budget Office has estimated that the spending for this new extension will be $6.1 billion over the first 10 years of the program. So real quickly, I just want to say two things why it's important to focus on expansion in the postpartum period, is that perinatal related mortality has long been a public health concern, and the ability to correctly identify and report perinatal related deaths has been a huge challenge. In the United States, perinatal related mortality has increased over the past few decades, which could in part be due to improved data collection strategies. Yet in the United States, perinatal related mortality remains higher than in comparable countries, and there's significant racial and ethnic disparities. For example, Black people who are pregnant, compared to any other racial group, are likely to die 2 to 3 times more likely within pregnancy or within 42 days of the end of the pregnancy. So despite Medicaid coverage options for low-income pregnant and postpartum people, there's gaps that still remain. This is especially true in the postpartum period. According to a 2005-2013 analysis of the Medical Expenditure Panel survey data, nearly 60% of pregnant people experience a month-to-month change in insurance type during the 9 months of the pregnancy, and half were uninsured at some point during following birth, actually. So just in conclusion, there's some really, really good news about this new policy. It extends Medicaid postpartum coverage, and it'll potentially lead to the lower number of folks who are uninsured, while promoting preventive and continuity of preventive services. Thanks, Jenny.
Thank you, Amelia. One thing I was struck by as you were talking here, that I think Omar and Rachel's comments also spoke to, was how this act is going to add a little bit more stability. I was kind of stunned by what you said about how much people's insurance coverage varies around pregnant. That's crazy. I mean, how do you sustain prenatal care if you don't have consistent insurance? And likewise, how do you sustain anything if you don't have consistent housing or consistent income stream? So I think one thing that this is offering across the different policy areas is stability. Are there considerations we should have for how to make sure Washingtonians benefit from these increased opportunities for stability? What should we be thinking about in our state. Rachel, do you maybe want to lead us off and think about some ways to make sure that the housing money actually helps folks who it should be helping here?
Yeah, sure. Well, in good news, we've got a really competent statewide organization or state organization, state government that is distributing the rental assistance money and the homelessness money. So I think that's we're set pretty well. I've been attending and working. I don't mean we're totally set, but I mean we're coming into this in a pretty good position to be able to distribute these funds in a way that is really going to help people. I have the opportunity to participate in a lot of conversations with other folks in positions like mine around the country, with national experts, and have been engaging in these conversations about, how do we set up rental assistance programs and whatnot for the last year. And consistently, our state is frequently lifted up as a leader in doing that really, really well. So, like I said, that we put some early CARES Act money into creating a rental assistance program. The Department of Commerce is the entity in Washington that distributes that. And they just did a very good job. I mean, they set up a program that was at a scale that, they haven't had before, and that's going to be at an even greater scale. And they ramped that up pretty quickly, got money out to every single county pretty quickly, and are continuing to refine the program. They have been a leader in creating, and again, I'm not going to say this is perfect, and they're looking at, like with the American Rescue Plan Act funding, how to do an even better job with this. But with the funding that came in from the December relief package, they required every county that had rental assistance funds to work closely with and use some of its resources to fund what they called by and for organizations. So trusted organizations in communities. These were primarily culturally specific organizations to do the outreach, in language, if folks didn't speak, if English wasn't, the community's first language, to do the outreach to communities who might not be reached by sort of big mainstream programs. And that was really seen and really is a best practice. So, it's good news that we've got some good folks administering this at the state level. There's going to be more to do. Community members are going to need, and advocates are going to need to watch it and see how things roll out. Some local governments have not been quite as effective in their outreach and in their distribution of funds. And this is, probably because some of these, entities are very small, even though they're government, they don't have a bunch of extra staff. So I think that advocates need to keep an eye, and we'll keep an eye on this. I guess the one other thing I'll say is there's a whole bunch of money in this relief package that is just state and local government relief. It's pretty flexible money for states and local governments. So we are going to be able to, hopefully, if we organize and advocate and push, have something to say about how that money gets spent. We won't control it all, but that's really the biggest portion of the ARPA is a state and local relief money. So, we're starting to work with local governments to urge them to spend some of that money on homelessness and affordable housing needs. There was a big letter that a whole bunch of mayors around the state signed recently and sent to legislative leaders, urging them to spend some of the state's flexible money on affordable housing and homelessness needs. So there's going to be ongoing advocacy to make sure that these resources get used in the best way.
Omar, what are you tracking at the state?
Yeah, well, one of the things that I would say is that, Washington State has the most regressive tax code in the country, where the lowest income Washingtonians pay up to 6 times of their income in basically sales tax. So that's every time that they go out and buy groceries, food, bills, everything that's sales tax that contributes to the state's revenue. And so it creates a higher impact. So I would say that's one piece that has hurt Washingtonians for a really long time, particularly low-income Washingtonians. And I think the other piece is, back during the Great Recession, the state made a lot of austerity cuts to our public benefits programs and essentially balanced the state's budget on the backs of low-income Washingtonians, which even to this day, we're still working to undo a lot of those hurtful changes that were made. And so, the piece that I would add is that a lot of the benefits that are coming now are going to be felt really greatly, and so that's something that we're tracking. And I'm happy to plug in an action of we're trying to increase the TANF grant back to pre-recession levels. So we do have a current budget ask at the state legislature that to increase it by 15%, and that's just getting it back to pre-recession levels, so back to the rate at 2008 when the grant was significantly higher. Obviously, we wanted it to go higher and be more bold, but right now that's our main ask is to do that. And so that's something that we've been definitely tracking is what are some of the lessons that we can learn from the Great Recession and apply that to now, so that we're not making the same mistakes, or rather the state legislature is not making some of the same mistakes that they did over a decade ago. So definitely that's something that we've been tracking and pushing for, and ensuring that lawmakers are hearing from their constituents about what were some of the impacts that happened over a decade ago and how we can learn those lessons moving forward. And some of what we've seen from the legislature seems pretty promising, but we want to make sure that we continue to push for those cuts to go not only during the length of the pandemic, but beyond. So it's like, how can we think boldly? And that's something that we definitely want to push for, and thinking boldly and really pushing for establishing really that baseline of support to uplift families out of poverty.
Yeah. Rachel's comments about the capacity of the Department of Commerce to get the housing support out speaks to the value of well-funded and functional state government. And it's both hard to stably fund our government with a regressive and insufficient tax base, but some of our social service programs are still reeling from the cuts they absorbed during the Great Recession. So, Amelia, thoughts on Washington? I know the Medicaid rollout is a little further into the future than some of the immediate needs, but
so it's not supposed to hit until next year. But the one thing I was struck by with the other panelists is that states can opt into this change. They don't have to do it. No one's making them do it. So I feel that kind of puts us behind the eight ball. We're kind of kicking the can down the road for what's actually going to happen to families if they don't have access to Medicaid services. So I was definitely struck by that, and I hope that Washington State decides to do the right thing and actually extends Medicaid coverage for families, low-income families in Washington State.
Yeah, we should be one of the first states to do that, kind of given some of our fast movement on that. But yeah, that's an interesting and good point, that unlike some of the other parts of this that are automatic, this is one where the states have to opt in. So we have a question already in the chat, as well as two attestations to the Amelia's great teaching. Somebody spoke to, I can attest to Amelia's valuable policy writing memo teaching. But our first question actually comes from Anjani McCleary, an MSW of 2007. She is now a Blaine County Commissioner in Idaho, and has served as a county commissioner there for 13 years. She says the policy in Idaho, the policy environment is very different than in Washington. What would you suggest for policy making in a different political environment, particularly in this time of flux? I don't know if folks have thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in with a few thoughts, because it's in the time I've been in this job, our chamber, our state Senate, has been controlled by a different party than it's controlled by now. And it was much harder to get things done, particularly when, one party controlled one chamber and one party controlled the other chamber. And, we didn't have quite DC style of gridlock, or what we used to call DC style of gridlock, but it was tough to get things done. I mean, a few things that I would say is that just don't stop working on it. Don't stop advocating. Don't throw up your hands and give up. A lawmaker may not agree with you in one meeting. that doesn't mean, keep the door open for an opportunity where they might come around in another meeting. These issues aren't always completely partisan, right? There's plenty of things that get done with bipartisan support. And there were some things that we were able to accomplish, even when, the legislature was in such a difficult, was just such a difficult sort of makeup in the past. The other thing I would say is organize, because you can change people's votes. You can change whether or not you change their minds. You might be able to change their minds, and you can and should try, but you can change people's votes by putting constituent pressure on them, by especially getting folks who are directly impacted by these issues to show up and to say, what are you going to do to make sure that me and my family and my neighbors in my community have a safe place to live? I'm going to make sure that you do that, and I'm going to hold you accountable. So organize and hold them accountable. You can be creative about who you engage. There's some lawmakers who are particularly moved by constituent pressure. There are some who aren't, but sometimes they're moved by, a particular nonprofit in their community that they know and love. You kind of have to do research on who your decision makers are. And then the last thing that I'll add, I'll probably have other ideas, but I'd love to hear other folks' thoughts too. Omar, Poverty Action does a lot of organizing. The last thing I'll add is that my organization created a 501c4, which is a different type of nonprofit. Most nonprofits are 501c3s. You can do advocacy, but you can't do any electoral work. You can't do any partisan electoral work. You can't endorse people. You can't mobilize people to support candidates who agree with you. But a 501c4 can do those things. And so we created a 501c4 and decided to get political. And so now we have a whole new set of tools that we can use to push people. We have helped elect people. We have helped unelect people. And that's kind of a new type of political power that we have, and that the housing justice movement in Washington has because we created that entity. So I would encourage folks to not avoid politics.
Okay, Omar, I saw you nodding along with the organize. Do you want to address this too?
Yeah, happy to. And obviously, of course, I want to echo everything that Rachel has said. I think it's very spot on. I think the pieces that I would add is, highlighting the power of storytelling. I think stories carry a lot of weight, and I've definitely seen lawmakers be moved by stories, and especially directly from their constituents, and even have seen them like quoting stories on the floor during floor debate. And I think that's very powerful, and it shows, it kind of speaks to the larger piece of, doing base building and organizing. I think the other piece that I would add is, be creative in your sort of your coalition development. Sometimes you might find that some of your unlikely allies can kind of help persuade some of those lawmakers who may not see you eye to eye, where, maybe on one issue you may not, with this unlikely ally, you may not agree, but then on this other issue, they're really strong and powerful and can kind of help persuade a particular lawmaker who sits on a particular committee or is in leadership. So I would definitely do some power mapping and seeing like who are those unlikely allies that you can engage that can kind of help you move the needle. And definitely it takes time and it takes years. I'm currently working on a campaign that's entering its 11th year, and we've made some headways this past year, particularly around engaging some of those unlikely allies, and we're still we're down for the count currently, but we're not giving up, and we're coming back strong, especially during the interim for sure.
I think that's a really important lesson for the social work students in the audience here who come out to our program out of a commitment to social change, thinking about it in terms of you can have an 11-year plan that you're only partway through, or you can be working for 15 or 20 years, and to see change happen gradually over time. And then, Amelia, I'm thinking about your class here. A window opens and you move through it. Sometimes, change doesn't happen until it does. And then things can move quickly. I'm curious about your thoughts about the political future of these expansions. So everything we've talked about is temporary. And the American Rescue Plan itself was passed not with a vote of the Senate, but rather through budget reconciliation. So kind of passed through the narrowest possible margins. We have a very polarized federal political environment, but programs can also kind of create their own constituencies. So I'm curious what you think, and maybe Amelia, I'll pick on you first about kind of the whether any of these changes might be durable or what could make them durable.
I don't know. Kids' health and well-being you'd think would be durable and be supportive, but it doesn't seem to move this policy. I mean, I think that the one thing that bothered me so much when I was doing research on this topic is that there's one policy we're advocating for to have these major changes. And that's highly problematic because no one policy can do that. So what do we do instead? We're looking at, racial disparities, institutional racism. Medicaid's not going to take care of that on its own. So, how can we be advocates for a multi-tiered approach to improving healthcare for people in the postpartum period, which is a very important period to kind of focus on in pregnancy? So I would just, I don't know. I'm not sure what the response is or how it would look different if it wasn't just, a policy that people could opt in and opt out of, and it only lasts up to 5 years. That's short-sighted in so many ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right that not only might it not be durable, it might not work unless we change other parts of the system along with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Omar or Rachel, thoughts about the long-term prospects of this?
Yeah, I would offer that. I think the Affordable Care Act is a great example of, even though there's been a lot of opposition even since it was first enacted, I think that slowly other lawmakers have been pushed more to agree and say like, oh yeah, this is a pretty good piece of legislation. So I would almost use that as sort of as a lesson to use of like, as you're seeing it unfold and implemented and seeing the impacts that it has, nobody wants to be that person who's going to cut back on services. And so I would think that like, as we continue to do our work and we continue to advocate, whichever level, possibly at the federal level at this point, that we continue to highlight those lessons and those stories of, see, here are the impacts that are happening in your community, and this is why we think that you should support it. And yeah, that's what I would say.
So change everything else, organize, tell the stories.
Yeah, I would add for in the housing world, the last year has done a number of things, right? I've mentioned before, and I think it's obvious that like the importance of having a home and an actual good quality, safe home where you have your own walls, not a mat on the floor in a shelter, has just been so much more visible. We've also seen the housing justice movement. So housing advocates and advocates for ending homelessness have really been galvanized. That is true in our state. An example of how we know that is that in 2019, like we do a lot of advocacy. We send out a lot of like, click here to call your legislator right now. In 2019, I think we mobilized about 2,000 people. Last year in 2020, we mobilized well over 5,000 people. And so, people just have said, we got to fix this. So that's true in our state. It's also true at the national level. We also now have a president who came into office, part of his campaign promises or his campaign plan, his housing plan that he talked about during his campaign was making housing making it available, making housing assistance available to everyone who needs it. So basically making housing an entitlement. Again, that is very different from where we are right now. Currently, about 1 in every 4 households or 1 in every 4 people who qualifies for help with housing gets it. Making housing a human right or an entitlement would mean that 4 out of 4 people who need housing would get it. So there's, we're fortunate to have a really great national partner, the National Low Income Housing Coalition, who is sort of like our leader in the national level advocacy, and they're sort of pivoting now. Coronavirus isn't done. People are still at risk. There's still a lot of implementation to do. But let's use this moment to make major change. And so they've got a campaign called the Housed Campaign that is pushing 4 pillars. One is to expand rental assistance to everybody who qualifies. The second is to greatly, greatly increase the supply of affordable housing that's available to low-income people in Washington. For every 100 of the lowest income households, there are 31 affordable and available rental homes to them. So that's an enormous gap. So we need a lot more money from the federal level and the state and local levels to actually create more housing that's affordable. The third pillar is providing emergency assistance for families in crisis by creating a new program, a new housing stabilization fund, so that if somebody loses a job and can't pay their rent, their car breaks down and they can't pay their rent, there are resources available for them so that one disaster that happens in their life, they get sick and they have a big healthcare bill, that one thing that happens in their life doesn't, make them lose their home. And then fourth, to really strengthen renter protections. The power balance, the power differential between landlords and tenants is quite large. We're doing a lot in Washington on tenant protections now, and even this legislative session. But there's a whole lot of power that landlords have, and tenants lose their homes far too frequently. Low-income tenants lose their homes especially, and in particular, Black families, Black women with children are evicted at the highest rates. And so, we need stronger tenant protections to keep people in their homes and to address the racial disparities. So I'm going to share, in fact, I think Brooke has the link. So if folks want to know more about that campaign, I would encourage you to sign up for NLHC's list, or even to get on our email list, and we'll keep folks updated about how they can support efforts to make that happen, to make that real.
Yeah, I'll also say that the national director of NLIHC, I'm not as good at saying it. I'm not as good as saying it as Rachel is a social worker, is an MSW, Diane Yentl. So it's great to see our profession out there advocating for change. I want to suggest again, if folks in the audience have questions, please put them into the link on the streaming. We're monitoring that and we'll be able to see it. I did have one question, I believe probably Rachel and no one else knows, but it comes from Suzanne Martin, who says, I would be interested in knowing the overhead expense associated with the processing of federal to state to county to local nonprofits for the rental payment vouchers. I don't expect you to have probably the
yeah, I think
but maybe think about the implementation system here. Does that?
Well, I think that the federal dollars are have that actually. They provide a cap, and they say that 10%, I believe it's 10%, can be used for administration. So I think that's what you're getting at, and I believe that that's the cap for federal dollars.
Okay, and is that adequate? Is it?
That's a good question. It's, probably close to adequate. I mean, I will say we work with a lot of nonprofits that are housing providers or homeless service providers. And there is just no doubt that folks are really strapped right now. So that may be enough for, local governments to distribute the funding. I think that, and it may be, it's probably enough or close to enough for the nonprofits that are doing this work. I think one of the challenges right now is it is just hard to find enough people to do it. This work has been really hard over the last year. I want to just give a lot of credit, because I assume if we've got a room full or a Zoom full or whatever of social workers, some folks probably work in the homeless service system, and those organizations and those direct frontline workers have just been absolute heroes during this crisis, like keeping people safe and healthy, risking their own health in a way we've never seen before, shifting from these congregate shelters very, very quickly to getting people into hotel and motel rooms. I have a good friend who does some of this work, who told me at the very beginning of this, one week, she told me that she spent the entire week hiring unemployed bartenders and waiters and waitresses to help staff their homelessness system, because they just needed that many more people. And that was who was available. Like, So I know that our system, I'm kind of going on a tangent here, but I know that our homeless system and our housing system is really stretched right now. So even if that's enough money, it may just be that it's still going to be challenging for folks to be able to do this additional level of work. They're doing it and they're doing it well. But I think any additional resources to sort of bolster the nonprofits who are on the front line of this is always really, really welcome, especially right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good point. And going back to your earlier point as well, which is, this pandemic didn't enter into a well-functioning and equitable world. This pandemic hit a world with a lot of structural inequalities, a lot of inequity in the economy, a lot of systemic racism, a lot of marginalization. One thing I worry about with the different provisions of the pandemic relief plan is who's getting left out. One advantage of the American Rescue Plan is it made some provisions, as has Washington State, for recognizing that a lot of residents are not legal citizens or legal permanent residents here. So it extended some options to households with mixed immigration status. But what else should we be paying attention to as we think about these implementation systems, and who's at risk of not benefiting from the benefits?
Omar, do you want to talk at all about that? I'm not seeing.
Did you put my soda somewhere?
Yeah, the only piece that I would say is particularly around the child tax credit and the earned income tax credit is, during the first two rounds of the stimulus, the IRS had like a non-filers portal where folks who did not make enough income to file their taxes could just kind of go in there, enter a little bit of information, and they were eligible to receive their stimulus. And with this new round, people are required to go through filing their taxes, and unfortunately the portal is not up. So we definitely have been advocating for that to be included, and that does create an additional barrier for families to access that. Thankfully the deadline has been extended till I think May 15th. So normally today would be tax day, but they have an additional month to do that. But it does definitely create barriers since a lot of places aren't open. You can probably still get an application at your local library or other or United Way, but it definitely does still create an additional barrier on top of the ones that you've mentioned, Professor Romich, around immigrant families being left behind. And although they have made some additional provisions for mixed status families, especially within the tax credit, which we're really happy for, there's still a lot of other immigrant families that are being left behind and have no other supports. Thankfully, the state of Washington has been making some steady gains and included an immigrant relief fund, and they are putting a lot of funding into that. But definitely it's nearly not enough. Definitely they don't have access to unemployment benefits and things like that. So that's definitely something to consider.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll just add that the rental assistance funds do not have any requirements that people provide proof of being documented to access. So folks will be able to access those funds. And just another note about the fact that there's not a non-filer portal open, really major impact on folks experiencing homelessness for being able to access a stimulus payment. So we've been pushing as well and don't understand why that isn't open.
Yeah, because there are households who would be eligible for the child tax credit who have no reason to be tax filers. Mm-hmm. So if you have a disability and get SSI or SSDI, you don't need to be a tax filer in many circumstances. But if you're parenting a kid, you would qualify for the tax credit. Yeah. I think it's going to take a lot of advocacy to make sure the IRS gets that credit to all families who would benefit from it and who are eligible for it. So, Amelia, how do we generally do on Medicaid? I think in terms of access.
The thing is that it's so different state to state.
Mm-hmm.
That what's kind of like the threshold when you're doing a good job versus not doing a good job. So that's a really good question, and I'm not qualified to answer at this point. But I did want to ask my colleagues on the panel. I kind of hear all of us talking from our perspective, and it seems like it's a real kind of siloed approach. We have housing over here, we have poverty over here, and then we have Medicaid, which is linked to poverty, of course, and potentially low-income housing. I was wondering, are there ways you can see the three of us, or our topic areas that we're kind of talking about today, collaborate, share resources, think about kind of eliminating the siloed approach that we have to abide by given federal regulations and state regulations. But what does that look like if we, somehow we're able to tie up, connect Medicaid expansion to housing, right? They seem to, and poverty and child poverty. I'm just curious as to your thoughts about that.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, people don't live their life in silos, right? Like people need a home, they need enough money to, pay their other bills and to buy their food, and they need healthcare, and they need good schools. Like, all these things are related, right? And we do tend to get really kind of in silos in a way that we would probably be stronger if we were together. It's, I hope that, the fact that there's new possibilities and new things opening up, and maybe we're not going to have to, if our state, for example, implements progressive revenue, and it's not in such an austerity mode, and it's not trying to just divide up way too small of a pie, into smaller and smaller pieces. I hope that will allow all of us more of an opportunity and incentive to work together, and to talk about, what do families and individuals really need to be their best selves. I think that some of that happens. There's a, statewide poverty reduction work group, for example, that is looking at how do we address poverty in our state. Poverty Action and the Housing Alliance work really closely together on a lot of things. There are different sort of like roundtables where progressive groups come together and people who care about low-income folks come together. But I think you're right that we still haven't gotten it quite right. So I'm not quite sure what else to add. Maybe Omar has something else to add to that.
No, I wish I had something additional to add, but I definitely will echo what you've said, and we'll add that I think we always work to try to highlight each other's respective issues in conversation, and sometimes it's kind of hard to untangle some of that. But I think another piece related to that is we host semi-annual listening sessions where we travel around the state and talk to folks about what they're experiencing, and we often hear issues that are maybe not quite related to the work that we do, but are sort of intertwined, and being able to share that and reach out and say like, hey, I definitely heard this. Is that something that you've been hearing? And vice versa. So I think that definitely that's where we're a little bit siloed, but at the same time, I think that some of us have like a piece of the pie that we're pretty strong in, and it's sort of doing some of those cross coalition work to uplift each other's issues and voices and work in tandem together. So that's definitely what I would add to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like to think of my work as being part of kind of an ecology of change. And I think the way you described it, we have some connections, and we have some distinct nodes, which makes sense. But I do think having the perspective that, these boundaries need to be porous, and perhaps more porous than they are right now is a good one. So, all right. We are about at the end of our time here, and we've covered, some important parts of this kind of groundbreaking act. I'm going to ask our panelists if they have any final words or thoughts for our audience, and particularly with an emphasis towards what social workers could be doing, or anti-poverty advocates, social work allies could be doing in this moment. Amelia, could you lead us off, please?
Sure, no problem. I guess what I'd like to say is that Medicaid, as it currently stands, is not enough. We need a more integrated approach, an integrated approach to reproductive health in pregnant people and pregnant postpartum folks. So I think, and then my kind of words of wisdom or question for social workers is, advocacy and more of it. Thank you.
Omar?
Yeah, I would definitely add that, I see all social workers as being advocates. We advocate on a day-to-day basis, especially for those of us who are service providers and are, doing individual advocacy for services, for things that our program participants, our clients need, and being able to utilize those skills and turn around and then do macro work. I know that when I was a baby social worker, I was definitely more in the micro work, doing housing case management over a decade ago. And then it got to the point where I felt like I was out of my scope of practice to be able to essentially meet the needs of my program participants, of my residents. And so that's what brought me to get my graduate degree and get my MSW, was because I felt like I needed those tools and kind of focus more on the macro work and seeing how the two work tandem in tandem together. And I think that it's important for social workers to advocate because they're the ones who are seeing the impact of the policies on the ground day to day. Being able to highlight those stories for lawmakers and for state agencies and sharing how is it that this policy is impacting folks. And there's a number of barriers of why a lot of folks aren't able to advocate, and having that voice, having that person in their corner to be like, okay, well, I know that you can't make it, but I could definitely make sure to advocate. So I would definitely encourage all social workers to sign up for an advocacy organization that speaks to them and that shares their passions, their issues, and things, and their values, and advocate alongside with them. It's going to make the work a lot easier for you and for us.
Rachel?
Yeah, I would just second and third advocate. You can do it. It's entirely legal as a nonprofit to advocate. It's entirely helpful as a social worker, to share the stories and to bring your clients' stories and to make room for your clients to tell their own stories to decision makers. I think there's a really powerful thing that as social workers, we can do if you're working directly with people who are struggling, is you can kind of like weave the whole story. Like you hear lots of different people being impacted. So when you tell those stories, people can't say, well, there's a weird thing about this family, or there's a weird thing about this client. It just impacted them, which sometimes happens, but you sort of bring this whole tapestry together for how policies are impacting the people that you care about. The other thing, I'll just use this moment to since we're all saying advocate, I'm going to share, Brooke is going to share in the chat a couple of things. So we've got, like I said, about a week left of the legislative session. We've been working on what we're considering the off-ramp to the eviction moratorium, all the policies that we need to have in place for that moratorium to be able to end without thousands or potentially hundreds of thousands of people losing their homes. Because it just got published today, I wanted to share a guest editorial that we have up on the Seattle Times website. It lays out what we're thinking of as the off-ramp for the eviction moratorium, and also why we think we need the moratorium to extend a little bit longer than its planned June 30th end date. So that just kind of helps you understand several bills that we see working together to prevent an eviction cliff. And then the other link that we'll share there is that one bill that we're working on, it's House Bill 1277. This would create a new funding source for rental assistance and homelessness prevention, and also operations and maintenance of permanent supportive housing, which is one of the most important solutions to homelessness. This would create a new funding source that would generate almost $300 million over the next biennium. That is coming up for a vote on the Senate floor. It's already passed the House. It's coming up for a vote on the Senate floor anytime in the next several days. So we have this action alert up. You can do, it's a very simple, put in your information, add a comment to personalize it if you want, hit send, and it'll send it off to your senator. So I would encourage people to think about doing that and supporting that bill. So thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Rachel. And thank you also to Amelia and Omar for taking part in today's discussion. Thanks to those of you who are spending a beautiful sunny Seattle day watching us live. And thanks to those of you who will be watching us on the archive stream later. I also owe thanks to Katie Lamar and Brooks Callison, who've done a lot of the behind the scenes work to get us here today and to moderate your questions and make sure the technology works. So thank you to Brooks and to Katie, and continued thanks to the School of Social Work for its support, and its support particularly of the West Coast Poverty Center. So again, we have had a bit of a conversation about this groundbreaking legislation. We've talked about how necessary it is in the current context, but we've also talked about how this alone will by no means be sufficient. Whether it's effective, how effective it is, will depend on a lot of other contexts and implementing organizations, and some broader social change that needs to happen to make these policy steps forward and durable. So thank you all for having this conversation, and may these conversations continue. Bye-bye. Thanks.